Hello everybody, my name is Devin and I am a level designer working on titles like The Afflicted and The Network, both of which can be found in the description below. Some of the links to IndieDB, so you can check them out. I am currently working on indie projects as a level designer and a game designer on both a volunteer basis as well as through the Arizona-based studio Radial Impact. To make following this tutorial easier, please download the zip file found in my portfolio, and I'll link that in the description below. It'll contain all the materials we'll be editing, so make sure to grab that to make this easier, as well as using the most recent update of the Unreal Development Kit, making sure you got the latest build so there's no problems between my version and your version. So what I'm going to show you today is how to make a pressure pad puzzle script. So let me show you what it does right off the bat. So I was inspired to make this script from Batman Arkham City, one of the Riddler trophies. Was based on the velocity of Batman when he pressed a pressure pad. So first I'll show you, like, as soon as you step on this pad, the light on it turns green, and once you step off, it turns on green. So that lets you know that you're standing on it. So let me show you what it does. So I made a simple setup scene. I'm going to show you how to make. There's 3 different elevations that we'll be jumping from. So from this first elevation, we jump on the pressure pad. We'll notice the first light, and then it turns off. So basically how this functions is like those hammer and anvil kind of style carnival games where you hit the hammer against the one plank of metal, and the stronger you are, the more the lights shoot up and the bell things at the top. So it's pretty similar to that. So you basically gotta hit this pad going at a certain velocity. So once you jump up from up here, I didn't go fast enough, so you'll see that there was only 1 light. So if you get the right velocity from the second one, you should get 2 lights. There we go. Now we have 2 lights. So the goal is to get to 3rd light. And in order to do that, you gotta jump from the highest elevation I provided in this level. Also, the level will be available to download in the zip file. I'll have the UDK package and this level if you don't want to build it, but I'll show you how to build this level really quick. So once I jump up from here, we got all 3 lights, and then a cutscene that shows the 3 lights, and then this door opening saying we solved the puzzle, and then we can go through this door. So that's the puzzle, and I'm going to show you how to recreate it. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to open up a new map. So just go into top here and go to create a new level, and I did midday lighting, so this is our blank scene. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to set up the wall that we use for our door. So we're gonna mess with this dimensions of this red builder brush. This is what you use to create BSP, which stands for binary space partition, which isn't really necessary to know, but it's just a nice little thing to know. But this basically uses brushes to help build geometry. So with this selected, you can move this builder brush, and then if you go over here to the CSG, if you hit add, it'll build simple geometry based around the builder brush. So I'm going to hit Control-C to undo that. So we basically want to make a pretty thin wall. So what we're going to do, paying attention to what our axes are, I want you to right-click on Brushes under Cube. And now we're going to see the dimensions of the cube builder brush. So we're going to mess with these dimensions. So we're going to make a pretty big wall. So we want the Z to be pretty tall. So we'll do 1024. And as you can see, the builder brush automatically conforms to the dimensions we're setting here. For the Y, we're going to do 32 to make it rather pretty thin, and then for X we're going to do 4096 to make it a pretty long wall. So now that we got that built, let's position this so it's touching the ground. A cool trick that I use is if you, with any object selected, either static meshes, interactors, or brushes, if it's in the air and you want it to touch the ground, just hit the end key and it'll just snap to the nearest surface. But you gotta make sure it's not near any other objects. So say it's right near this cube, and if I hit end, it'll stop when it hits collision to the cube. So we want it to hit the collision with the floor, so hit end when it's not above anything. So now we got it to the floor. And now we want to build the wall itself. So let's hit add. And now we got our huge wall. So now with that in mind, I want to drag out a certain material, the same material that's applied to this cube and this floor. So all we have to do is just double click on the cube or the floor and go to rendering and take out the materials tab and hit the magnifying glass to find it in the content browser. It'll bring you right to it. So I'm just going to start slapping this material onto these sides of the wall, and now we have a plain wall. So next I'm going to create the door. So creating the door is just a matter of finding these static meshes in the content browser. So I'm just going to type in door and filter it for static meshes, and I need two different ones. I need the frame and I need the door mesh itself. Now with the door itself selected, hit F4 just to see its properties and make sure it has collision turned on. It does. So we're going to right click and convert it to a mover. The reason why we're going to do that is because we need to animate to open. Like in the example you saw the door open, it needs to be an interactor. So we made it a mover, which automatically makes it an interactor. So hit F4 again to go back into its properties. And the reason why I showed you the collision type before, saying it had blocked all, is just to hit home the point that when you make something an interactor, it loses its collision. See how it's on no collision? Before it was on block all. So we want to put it back on block all so you can't get pass through it. So now with it being an interactor and with it having collision, we're gonna maneuver it using the move tool. Just move it into place. Luckily these objects were made to be used together, so they fit pretty well together. So now I'm going to place this into the wall itself, anywhere you want. I'm going to put it right here. So now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to cut a hole in this BSP wall. And to do that, we need to use a subtractive brush. And in order to use a subtractive brush, we just got to use our builder brush. So what we're going to do, we're going to morph the size of this builder brush by using the geometry mode tool, and it's right next to the camera here. What this allows us to do is it allows us to edit faces and vertices on the builder brush, kind of like how you would do in Max or Maya or some other 3D modeling program. So we want to bring in these side walls together. So select this face and just drag it inward, and you'll see the brush move forward. So we want to kind of get the width of the door as accurately as we can. Do the same thing on this side. Select that face and drag it in. So that's pretty good. And now we just got to fix the height and bring it down. And that should be good. Let me move this. It gets a little tricky when you have to select faces when they're in geometry. So get it as close as possible. And we're not going to mess with the width this way because we want to cut out the hole, so it has to be the same size. So now back to CSG. Next to add to the right is subtract. So just click that. It may not look like something happened, but you can tell it happened by looking through this way. So let me move the door and the door frame. We just cut a hole through the wall. That should be as close to the dimensions as the frame and the door as we did with the builder brush. So I'm just going to quickly just copy. I'm going to select this face of the BSP brush, Control C, and then Control V on these, because it takes the material that when you copy it, you copy the material. So I'm just copying the material on here so it looks good. Now we're going to reposition this door and door frame kind of in the middle as close as possible so it shows up on both sides. That should work as good as we're going to get it. Just position this. Okay, now we got our doorway and door frame set up, and we got the door to be an interactor. So now we're ready to start building the level how we had it shown in the demo I just showed you. And for that we're going to need certain objects. So let me find those objects in the content browser. So the first one we're going to need is called s_lt_floors_sm_tile floor broken 4x4. It's this one. So I'm just going to drag one copy of that out. The next one we're going to need is called s_nec_floors, and it's this one. So I'm just going to drag a copy of that one out. Next, we're going to need s_hu_floors underscore SM fire escape. We're going to take this one right here, drag that out. We're going to need an S underscore NEC underscore pillars underscore SM underscore tech pillar, and it's this one right here. So we're going to drag one of those out. Next, we're going to need S underscore LT underscore light, and it's this one. So we're going to drag a copy of that out. And then we got our two doors out. So that's all the static meshes we're going to need. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to find my cube that defaults into a level. I'm just going to drag it over on this side so we can see it, because we're going to place lights on one of the faces of the cube so we can see how we're doing in terms of solving the puzzle. So I'm just going to drag it over here near the door. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to construct our 3 elevation shifts. So using the stairs, bring it down a pretty good amount so you can start stepping on it, and just hold Alt and left click drag, and it'll create a duplicate, and just maneuver that into position. So we're going to just do 2 stairs for each elevation shift. So I'm going to start putting these in place. If you've opened my level instead of creating your own, just fast forward through this part. I'm going to just quickly construct the elevation shifts how it was seen in the demo. So I'm going to just quickly do that. Just dragging, selecting it, and then dragging a copy out, and then pressing spacebar to change the widget to changing it to rotation, so we can rotate certain objects certain ways. Let me just move that over. Now I'm creating the second elevation shift. Putting the stairs here. Duplicating objects. So just follow along, create the same configurations as I'm doing. We're also going to need to position this light in a better way so you can land on it. So I'm just going to center it up. Alright, now we're taking these 2 sets stair, duplicating it. If I didn't mention it before, to select multiple objects, click on an object and then holding Control, left click, select the other object, and then you'll have both of them selected. It's a neat trick to make selection easier. Correctly. If you hold down Shift while moving an object, the camera will move with it. So it's a very helpful tool as well to really get things lined up as best as you can. Here we go. Almost done. Let's make this a little further back. Now what I'm going to show you really quick is how to scale objects. Down here, where all these ones are, these directly control how you scale objects. So what I want to do is I want to increase the length of this object going this way, and according to this widget, it's the y-axis. So if we look at these 4 ones, this is how you read them. The first one on the far left, this scales the whole object in every axis. So if I make this a 5, the object will become 5 times larger in all directions. So I'll do an example of that. That's it, 5 times all axes scaled to 5. Now if I do it by the one axis that I want, so I'll do 1.5 in the middle, it'll scale in that direction. And how you read this is all axes to the far left, then X, Y, and then Z. So let me just scale this as close as possible. Alright, there we go. So now we have it set up. Just for aesthetic purposes, I'm just going to add pillars. That's as much as I'm going to do. So now that we have the whole elevation set up, next I want to do is I want to set up our pressure pad and the 3 lights over here. So let me just move this better view into view. So now select this light, put it towards the ground as best as possible, and I scaled it on all axes by 2 just to make it bigger and an easier target to land on. So that's in a good position. Let's just test this out, see if we can jump onto it. Okay, first we gotta do change to our world properties. First go to View, World Properties, and find Game Type. And then under Default Game Type, bring it to UT Game, and then Game Type for Play in Editor, which is PIE, do UT Game. Now we're set up, so now we have our link gun, and that's how we usually play in the editor. So let's see if we can, yeah, we can jump from it. From there, let's see if we can jump from it from our second elevation. Yes. And then let's see if we can get it from our third elevation. Looks like we can, and we can. Okay. So that's good. So the first thing we want to do is we want to make this an intervector so we can reference it in Matinee when we animate the material for it to go from black to green. So right click, scroll down to convert, and then convert to mover. And now with this converted to a mover, let's alt left click drag a duplicate and change its scale from 2 to 0.5 to make it smaller. Now we're going to just rotate it so it's facing, and we're going to place it against this wall. So this will just help us visually represent how well we're doing at solving the puzzle. So we got 1 there. So I'm just going to position it so it's at the bottom. Now I'm going to alt left click drag another version so it's in the middle, and then left click drag another copy of it. And now what I want to do, I want to select all the lights I just made. Now with all of them selected, hit F4, type collision into our search bar to filter, and then change its collision to block all. So now you can have collision when you come in contact with it. Next we're going to do, I'm going to open up the UPK package that is included in the description below. I believe I already opened it, but for those who don't know, you have to go down here to open external package and then find it. I'll get a warning because it's already open, but in here you'll have 4 materials. It's based on the original material that these lights have. I just added a parameter. So let me show you how we find it. I was told by one of my friends, Esteban Lopez, big props, that I forgot to really show how to move around in the material editor, so I'm going to quickly show. If you just left click and drag, you'll move like a pan, up and down, left and right. If you do left and right click drag, you'll zoom in and out. And then if you right click drag, you'll do pan as well. So that's how you really control in here, how to move around and stuff. So the one thing I'm going to show you is I added this parameter for emissive color. And if you watched my shield regeneration script, this is exactly what I did for the other material, where we're going to reference this parameter in this material to animate the color to change from black to green whenever we touch the pressure pad. So I just wanted to make sure you guys knew that this is what I did. And I basically made a copy of it 4 times and renamed them bottom, middle, top, and then pressure pad, because we're going to individually reference each light at certain points in our Kismet sequence. So first I'm going to left click on my material that says matte underscore pressure pad light, and I'm going to left click drag it and place it on our pressure pad, the one that's 2 times as large as the other ones. So as you can see, it turned from glowing to black, meaning it's not on. So now I'll do the same for the other 3 lights based on the naming convention that I used. So for mat underscore light gauge underscore bottom, we're going to apply this to the bottom light. Same with the middle to the middle, and then top to the top. So now we have the material reference set up. So now I think we are ready to build our trigger volume. So what we're going to do with the trigger volume, if you don't know, we're going to trigger volume allows us to reference this volume to trigger an event in Kismet. So what I want to do is to create a trigger volume, you have to use the red builder brush. And we're going to use a different shape than the normal square. We're going to use a cylinder. So in order to conform this square to a cylinder, we're going to left click on the cylinder shape under brushes, and it should conform to the default size of the cylinder brush. But first, before we even position this, we're going to put in dimensions for it. So under Z, we're going to make it 32. We're going to make it 32 units high. And then under outer radius, we're going to make it 40. So now it's got a radius of 40, which is a diameter of 80 Unreal units. So now I'm going to switch perspectives up here where the P is. Hit the P key to get to top view. And now we're going to position this how we want. So I'm going to just try to position it as center as possible. That looks good. And then go back to our perspective view. And as you can see, we didn't position it correctly in the Z-axis, so I'm just going to drop this down. Drop it down so it's as close as possible. That looks good. So now in order to create a trigger volume, I'm going to left click down here under volumes, left click, and then there's a trigger volume under this long list. It's in alphabetical order, so trigger volume should be towards the bottom. So I click trigger volume, and now if I move our BSP brush, you'll see this green brush. And if we hit F4, we can see that it's our trigger volume. So we just created a trigger volume that we will then reference in our Kismet sequence so that we can start the event when this is touched. So let's go into Kismet by pressing the K up here to open up Kismet in a new window. And you'll get this blank window. I'm going to position it so I can kind of see our scene as well as Kismet. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a handful of variables that we're going to be using throughout the sequence, similar to how we did in the shield regeneration script. If you haven't seen that, I'll have a link in the description below to it so you can check it out as well, because we'll be doing a lot of similar things. So first we're going to do is we're going to create a float variable. To do that, we're going to right click an empty space, go to new variable, and then select float, and then just float. By default, it's at 0.000. And we're going to set this to -560, and I'll explain why later on in the video. It will be important what these values are. And then for a variable name, I'm going to name this level 1 velocity. By naming our variable, we'll be able to more accurately know what this number represents, and luckily the variable name appears on the bottom. So when I say level 1 velocity, I mean the velocity jumping from the first elevation shift. So we're going to be making other level velocity variables called level 2 velocity, which represents this jump height, and then level 3 velocity that represents this jump height. So just keep that in mind. So now I'm going to select this variable, hit Control-C, Control-V to create a copy of it, and I'm going to change its value to -790 and change its name from level 1 velocity to level 2 velocity. Now I'm going to do the same one more time. So Control-C, Control-V, position it, change its value to -940, and change this one's name to level 3 velocity. So now we have all 3 velocities set up. So now what we're going to do is we're going to create a new float variable. Do Control-C, Control-V. And this one's going to be at 0 by default. And the variable name is going to be called player Z velocity. And this is the variable we're going to put the player's velocity when he touches this trigger volume. So if he jumps onto this trigger volume going -200 in the Z direction, this number will be -200. So now that we have our float set up, what we're going to do is we're going to do a interactor variable with our door. So I'm going to just right click, do new object variable using interactor 0, and then I'm going to name this door. We will need to do it for our lights though. So select the big light, do new object variable using intervector 2, and let's name this pressure pad. Now we're going to copy and paste this, and we're going to do one for each of these lights. So with the bottom light selected, right click the newly created intervector and do assign intervector to object variable. So now this replaces the new light from the original light. So like when I copy and pasted this pressure pad, it was 2 pressure pads referencing this one object. By selecting this and then replacing it, I replaced this light with this light. And we're going to rename it bottom light for a variable name. Now I'm going to copy and paste it again. Select the middle light, right click it, assign the new one, and name this middle light. And then one more time for the top light. So now that we have all our variables set up, I want you to Control-Alt left click drag a marquee selection to select them all, and with them all selected, press the C key to add a comment, and we're going to call this variables. Just keep it super organized, put them in their own space, because when you do that, it creates a nice small kind of visual cage where you can make sure like everything's perfectly conformed together. So if I had a sequence in here, that wouldn't make any sense. But I want only variables, so only variables are around this selection. Now we are ready to start our Kismet sequence. So the first thing I want to do is we need to create the initial event that starts off our whole puzzle sequence. And what this is the event's going to be whenever we touch that trigger volume we put into the level right here. Whenever the player touches that, we want start some of the puzzle elements to start activating and firing. So the first thing we're going to do is with our trigger volume selected, right click an empty space and do a new event using trigger volume 0 and do a touch. Now there's going to be a few things we need to change in the touch event property, and that's under sequence event max trigger count. We want to, instead of 1, we're going to do 0. And once we make it 0, this means this trigger can activate infinite times. If it was only 1, it would only activate once. But now that we have it at 0, it can trigger an infinite amount of times. So now we are going to set up the sequence that will check the player's z velocity so that we can compare that value with the values assigned to the float variables we created, the level 1 velocity, the level 2 velocity, and level 3 velocity. So we're going to set up the sequence where we find out what the player's velocity is once he touches this trigger volume. So what we need to do is we need to get the velocity. So in order to do that, we need the get velocity node that allows us to do it. So right click in the Kismet window, go to new action, new actor, and then get velocity. So the get velocity has a bunch of parameters that we're gonna enter in. So the first thing is a target. The target is going to be our player. So with the P key selected, left click the target parameter and it'll create a player variable already connected. And we only want to do the player that we're playing as, that's player 0. So we can uncheck all players just to make it player 0. Now velocity vector is the other one we need. We don't really need to worry about velocity magnitude. We just need the velocity vector. And what a vector is, it's a group of 3 numbers represented by X, Y, and Z that we're going to need to plug into a different node that we'll go into next to get the Z velocity from the player. So first we're going to create a new variable, and that's going to be a new vector variable. And this basically has the parameters for X, Y, and Z values. So we're going to plug that in. And what's going to happen is whenever the trigger volume is touched, we want to get the velocity of the player in all 3 axes. Now the reason why we're going to do all 3 axes is because the next node we're going to implement is takes apart the velocity vector and gives us individual values for each X, Y, and Z value. So make sure you have the touched input of the touched output of the trigger volume event into the input of the get velocity thing, and make sure you do the vector variable plugged into velocity vector. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to need a get vector components node, which basically takes a vector variable and breaks up each of its individual parameters into its own individual float. And I'll go into more what that means once we get the node out. So to get that node, we're going to go to New Action, Math, Get Vector Components. And we're just going to plug the out into the in here so that they're connected. And now under input vector, we want to put this vector variable in, because once we touch this trigger volume, there are going to be values placed into this variable based on the get velocity of the player. And now here, this is where it breaks it up into each individual float. So all we need to worry about is the z variable. So what we need to do is we're going to create a named variable. So go to new variable and named variable. And right now it's not assigned to anything. So in its properties under expected type, we're going to make a float. And now we want this to represent the player z velocity. So for the variable name, we're going to type in player z velocity. And once we do that, we should see a check mark indicating that it is linked up to this variable. So now this variable is going to be represented by this new named variable. So we're going to plug that in. So now whatever the z component of this vector variable is, that's what our player z is going to be, and that's the number we're going to use to compare the values that we created over here for the 3 different levels of velocity that are going to be reached. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to make it so every time you touch this trigger volume, this pressure pad animates and changes color. So to do that, select the pressure pad, right click back into Kismet and do New Matinee. Now double click Matinee to open up the Matinee window. This is the Matinee window which we'll be using to animate our light material. If you haven't watched the shield regeneration script tutorial, I recommend watching that because I go through this as well. But I'll go through this as simple as possible. So with our light selected and making sure it's an interactor, so let's hit F4, it is an interactor. With that selected, we're going to right click here, do add new empty group, and I'm going to name this pressure pad. Now with the pressure pad group selected, right click and do add new vector material param track. And down here under its properties, we're going to hit the plus sign to add a new material. And then for our target material, we're going to plug in the material that we used in our content browser that we assigned to the light. So we used matte pressure pad light. So I'm going to select that in our content browser and then hit this green arrow to apply it. So now I'm going to shrink the content browser again, maneuver things around. And now if you remember our param name, we called it emissive color. So we enter emissive color, so now we're affecting that parameter in our animation. So now the total time we're going to do for our animation is 0.2 seconds. So in the time track, scroll forward to get to 0.2 seconds. And what we're going to need to do is we're going to move this green arrow down to 0.2 seconds, as well as this red arrow that's default at 5 seconds. We're going to move that to 0.2 seconds as well. And this basically says our animation is going to be a total of 0.2 seconds in length. So next thing we got to do, we got to add 2 keyframes. One at the beginning of our animation and one at the end. So selecting this black bar, move it to 0.00 seconds and hit enter to create a new keyframe. And before you even try to make a keyframe, make sure the material param track is selected, otherwise you'll get an error saying there is no track selected. So now that we had one keyframe at our beginning, let's put another keyframe by pressing enter at the end of our animation. So now we got 2 of them. So now what I need to do is we need to change the color from black to green. And to do that, we need to expose a graph at the very top of the screen. So to do that, press this black box here, and then you'll see colors appear up here, and there's no change happening, so there's no line graph. So by default, when a keyframe is created for a vector material param track, all the values start at 0, which is black, which is what we want at the beginning. So we're not going to make any changes to the first keyframe. What we are going to do is we're going to make changes to the second keyframe. So, and the only color we want to change is the green color. So up here, select the blue and the red to make them disappear, and just so we can see our green. So now right click the green box here, select set value, and set this to 5. And now I'm going to press this button up here that says fit to view all, And now we have that graph shown to us. Now let's see if it animates. As you can see in our perspective mode, it's animating correctly, which is good. So that we have that set up. Let's exit out of Matinee. So now we want every time we touch this trigger, we want it to play. And every time we untouch the trigger, we want it to go into reverse. Meaning if we touch this trigger, this pressure pad light is going to go from black to green, showing that we're standing on it. And then once we untouch that trigger volume, it's going to go from green to black, showing that we're not touching it anymore. So let's go in and check that out really quick. Let's see if this works. It's working. Yep, it's working properly. So what we're going to do now is we're going to easily set up these lights to turn green as well. And we're not going to do it individually like we just did this pressure light. Since we did this pressure light, we want the lights up here to react the same exact way. So what we're going to do is we're going to marquee select all of this Matinee sequence, copy and paste it, and we're going to do one Matinee for each of these objects. So what we're going to do is we're going to replace the intervector variable. So let's do the bottom light first. So select our bottom light, right click, and then assign it. Now double click in here. Let's go to our empty group, right click on it and rename it. We're going to rename it bottom light. And now all we have to do is in the vector material param track, we're going to have to change what material it's referencing. Since we're doing the bottom light first, we're going to reference the mat underscore light gauge underscore bottom material. So select that in your content browser and then hit the green arrow so that it knows it's referencing that. And it has the same param name as the other, so we don't have to change that. And now it should work to where once we move the slider, this green light will turn from black to green. And it's doing so, meaning our quick shortcut is working. So now I'm going to ask you to do the same thing for the last two lights. So select all of them, select the whole Matinee, copy and paste it, just grab that middle light, right click on the intervector variable and reassign it, and then go back into the new Matinee, rename it, rename the group, do middle light, and then into the material param track and its properties, go to the content browser, select mat underscore light gauge middle, and then hit the green arrow to replace it. And now let's see if this works. Yep, it's working. Now we gotta do that one last time for the top light. So select all of these. So select this whole Matinee again. Control C, Control V. Now select the top light, right click on the new intervector variable and then assign it to the new light intervector. Now double click the Matinee, rename the group. I'm going to rename it top light. Then in the material param track, let us go to the content browser and select mat underscore light gauge underscore top. Hit the green arrow so that it references that material. And let's just see if it's working. Yeah, it's working. So now we have all three lights working through our Matinee animations. Luckily, we only had to do it once and just copy and paste and change some parameters so the Matinee animation knew what light material we wanted it to reference. So now what we need to do is we're going to name these, give them variable names or comment names. We're going to do an object comment. So select all of this light pressure animation Matinee sequence, and then under object comment we're going to just call it pressure pad. So now we know that this is the pressure pad, and we're going to do the same thing for all of these three lights. So we'll call this one bottom light, call this one middle light, then call this one top light. This will make sure we don't get confused on which animation is which. So now the next thing we're going to do is it's time to start comparing float values between each elevation variable and the player's Z velocity. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to need a compare float node, which can get access to by doing right click, new condition, comparison, compare float. Now here's our first compare float. So the two things we're going to compare is the player's Z velocity. We're going to put that into A. And the second thing we're going to compare is the first level 1 velocity variable, but we're going to do this through a named variable like we did our player Z velocity. So right click, do new variable, do new variable, and then under expected type change it to float, and then under find var name do level 1 velocity. It should be emphasized that you need to make sure you type in the exact name of that variable or you won't get that check mark. So now we have this new one, we're going to plug it into B, and then we're going to plug the out of vector components into the in of this compare float. So our next step is to plug in the A is less than B output of this compare float into the play input of the matinee sequence that represents the animation for our bottom light. So let's find our bottom light, select it all, drag it over here, and so A is less than B into play. And I'm also going to put an activate delay on this output. And in order to do that, you right click on the output, hit set activate delay, and I did 2.25 seconds. This is just for aesthetic reasons. Like it'll delay the light to turn on so you can see it turn on after 0.25 seconds, and it's better for aesthetic reasons. So it goes bottom light, and then when the second one's activated, it does a pause and then does middle light and then pause again and then a top light instead of them all turning on at the same time, which is confusing. So now that we have it set up to play, I'm going to quickly explain why we're going to do A is less than B instead of A is greater than B. And the reason why we're doing that is because the Z velocity is represented by a negative number. So the player Z velocity, we want it to be a larger negative number, meaning like when I say larger, I say like negative 5,000 is larger in terms of it being a negative number than -1. However, -1 is just a greater number. So what we want to do is we want to make sure the player Z velocity is faster than the level 1 velocity, so we got to make sure it's less than the level 1 velocity. So our level 1 velocity right now is at negative 560. So we want to make sure the player Z velocity is greater than that, is less than that, I should say. So if the player's velocity is negative 570, that's a less than, but it's actually faster. So now that we have that set up, we're going to do another compare float for our next level of velocity, which is our level 2. So I'm going to take all these variables and the compare float, Control C, Control V, and I'm going to hold the Alt key and left click on this output to disconnect it from the original play of the bottom light animation. And I'm going to rename this variable to level 2 velocity. So we still got the check mark, so it knows which variable to represent. And I'm going to plug in the completed output of the bottom light animation into the input of the new compare float. So the next thing is we're gonna start playing our middle light animation. So let's select our middle light, drag it over, and we're gonna do the same thing. A is less than the B into play, except I'm gonna change the activate delay to 0.5. So now that we have this set up, and we're doing the A is less than B for the same exact reasons as before, now what we're gonna do is we're going to do one more compare float. So grab all these guys right here, Control C, Control V, Alt left click the output of the compare float to get it out of the middle light. Now we're going to move this in position. Now we're going to do the completed output of the middle light animation into the end of this new compare float. And we're going to change the name of this variable from level 2 velocity to level 3. So now that's set up. And then we're going to plug in the last light animation. So for our top light, we're going to plug in A is less than B into play. So now we have all the lights working. Let's just double check that in our editor. So I'm going to play from here. Let's jump on this light. That's working. Now we got the second light. And then if we go to the top, we should get the third light. We got the third light. One thing, if you've noticed, they don't turn off, and that's what we're going to do next. So get back into Kismet, and we want to do is basically in the second compare float where we compared player Z velocity to level 2 velocity. What we want to do is if A is greater than B, we want to reverse this animation of the bottom light. So basically, if A is a greater negative number than our level 2 velocity, we're going to reverse this bottom light animation. So let's see if that works. And it does, but it's rather quick, so we're going to set an activate delay on this. Let's do a 0.5. Let's go back in and see if that works better. Yeah, it works pretty good. But I'm going to make it 1 second just so it's longer. So the next thing we're going to do, in the third compare float with level 3 velocity, we're comparing the player Z velocity with the level 3 velocity. Do A is greater than B, set an activate delay of about 1 again, and plug that into the reverse of the middle light animation. So let's see if that works. So I'm just going to jump up here real quick. Okay, we're running into an issue where this bottom light doesn't turn off. And that's an easy solution. All right. The last thing we're going to do, we're going to plug in the A is greater than B of the final compare, plug it into the reverse of the bottom light, and now it should turn off. So if we jump up from here, all 3 lights should turn on. And they shouldn't turn off because that's how the puzzle is solved. So I'm going to jump from the second height to see if the second and first lights turn off. Alright, they shut off at the same time. So what we want to do is I'm going to create a new delay node by pressing D on the keyboard and left clicking an empty space of the Kismet window. I'm going to create a delay. I'm going to create a 1 second delay from the third compare float, A is greater than B node. I'm going to plug that into start, and then the finished is going to go into the reverse of the bottom light. So now it should work properly. Okay, the reason why it doesn't work properly is because I'm going to take away all these ones. I'm going to start this one over. I'm going to do A is greater than B, plug that into the reverse of the middle light. And then A is greater than B, again, plug that into the start of the delay. Now that should work. Now we got it working. The timing's a little bit off, so I'm going to change the duration of the delay from 1 to 0.5. So now we have that working. So at the third compare float, we want special things to happen. The first thing we want to happen is we want all the lights to stay on. So what we're going to do is, in the A is less than B output, we're going to put that into stop of the middle light, and we're going to put that into the stop of the bottom light. And when it says stop, it just stops the animation and keeps them on. And then we're also plug that, we're going to plug the completed output of the top light matinee animation into the stop. So once it's done, it stops. So now they should all work. Let's jump right in. Good. So now we're able to get all 3 lights to turn on. Now we want that door that we made earlier to open. So we're going to create a new matinee to animate that door. So with the door selected, the one that we made an interactor, just to make sure, hit F4 to get its properties. It's an interactor. We're going to right click new matinee. Now we're going to double click the matinee to open up the matinee window. Now we're going to right click and add a new empty group, and we're going to call this door. Now right click the new group, and we're going to do a new movement track. And the total animation time is going to be 1 second. So we're going to drag these two triangles to 1 second. So now we're at 1 second, and it automatically creates a keyframe for you at the beginning. So all we have to do is go to the 1 second mark, hit enter to create a second keyframe, and then with that keyframe selected, go to the door and move it upwards. And now you should see a yellow line, and that represents the translation of the door in our animation, as you can see here. So if we play it, doors open, and you can see there's some clipping at the top. So I'm gonna get rid of that. I'm gonna get out of that matinee, and I'm gonna move this door slightly backwards. So now if we go back, you won't see clipping. It'll just go through the middle of the wall, which is good. So now we have our door set up. We're gonna create a quick cutscene that shows the door and the lights turning on like we did in the demo. So what we're gonna need a camera actor. In order to get to a camera actor, we need to go into our content browser, go to actor classes, and go to camera actor. And then left click drag it into our scene. Now we want to position this camera actor in a very specific way, just so it's viewing what we want it to view. So to do that, there's this eyeball icon. So select it, and then make sure you select the camera actor, because what it does is that it brings you into the viewpoint of that actor selected. So now as we move around, we're moving the camera actor itself. So I'm going to face it. I'm going to make it so it's pointing right to the door, and then unselect the lock selected actors, the camera button. And then once I back away, the camera's positioned right where we want it. Now we're going to create a second camera. So I'm going to left click, alt, drag a new camera, go back into the press the I button again just to get to the view of the camera, and then we can position it right where we see the lights pretty well. So do that and unselect the lock camera position so that you can see where the camera is. So now we're going to do some cutscenes, which is something I haven't done before in a tutorial, so I'll show you guys how to do it from scratch. So let's go back into here. We're going to need a new matinee. So select our first camera, which is facing the door. We're going to do new matinee, double click that new matinee, and we're going to do an add new camera group. I'm going to call this door camera. And once you create a new camera group, you're given a few different parameters you can mess with, which is movement. We can make this camera move around the level. And we also have an FOV angle, which stands for field of view. So we can make the field of view tighter or wider, depending on how we want to do for the cutscene. But these cutscenes are going to be very simplistic. And what we're going to do is the camera's not going to move, and it's not going to change its field of view. All it's going to do is stare at the door and let the door animation play. So it's going to be 1 second long, and it automatically creates one keyframe for you. So all we're going to do now is hit enter at the 1 second mark to make our second keyframe. And all it's going to do the whole entire 1 second is stare at that door. Now in order to create the actual cutscene, we need to create a director group. So right click in the gray space and do add new director group. And then with the director track selected, hit enter at the very beginning at 0.00 seconds. Hit enter, and then it's going to ask you what group you want to cut to. So we want to cut to door camera. So now we can see that's facing the door. And that's our very simplistic cutscene, one of two. So now we're going to quickly copy and paste this whole matinee sequence and the camera actor. Copy and paste, Control C, Control V. And now what I'm going to do, like we did before with the lights, is we're going to select the new camera actor, the second one facing the three buttons. We're going to select the camera actor variable and right click, and then assign it to the new camera. So now when we look through, we're going to look through this new perspective. So that saves us some time creating a new matinee from scratch. So now we're gonna do an object comment for all these matinees so we know which one's which. So select the one that animates our door. Call this door animation. select the new animation, the one that we used for the cutscene that faces the door. So we're going to do door cutscene. And then for the third and final one, we're going to call this one light cutscene. So now that we have all of them labeled, we can plug them in properly. What we want to do when the cutscene actually fires is we want to take control away from the player, make sure they can't run around, and make sure the GUI's really cleaned up so it looks really nice. So we're going to need a really specific actor for that. So I'm going to right click, do new action, toggle cinematic mode. So basically when you enabled cinematic mode, all these properties down here are taking into effect. So you disable movement, you disable turning, you hide the player, and you disable input, you hide the HUD, and it makes everything really pretty. So for our target's going to be the player. So hold down the P key and left click on the target parameter to create a new player variable already connected, and uncheck all players so it just has player 0. So now once the top light animation is done, we're gonna do a cinematic mode enabling. So go to from the completed output of the top light, put into enable, it enables that, and then from the output, we're gonna do the door cutscene. We're gonna do the light cutscene. So what we want to do first, we want to show all 3 lights turned on. So let's do the light cutscene first. So from the output of the toggle cinematic mode, put that into the play of the light cutscene, and then once that's completed, we want to plug in the completed of the light cutscene into the door cutscene, as well as the play of the door animation, so that once this is done, we start viewing the door and the door slides up. So let's see if that works. So that's working. That's working. All right. So that's working. The one thing that wasn't working is once the cutscenes are done, we go back to being the player, but we can't move because we didn't disable the toggle cinematic mode. All right. If you notice, after the cutscene, we couldn't move as the player, and that's because we didn't disable the toggle cinematic mode. So what I want to do is I want to copy and paste the cinematic mode as well as the player 0 variable. Drag that out. Hit Alt left click to remove that output. And so now when the door cutscene is completed, we want to disable cinematic mode, as well as destroy the trigger volume, which we selected and created to make that variable. So once we destroy the trigger volume, the event can't get fired after that point. So let's see if this works. Alright, and it works, and our door is open, and we can get access to this new area or whatever you want the result of the puzzle solving to be. So now that we got that working, that concludes the scripting section of this tutorial. I just want to build lighting just so it looks pretty. While it's building, I want to mention in the description you'll have access to the Dropbox link that will provide you with the level as well as the level package with all the materials in it set up for you, ready to go. So you can look at it, view it, see how I changed it even though I went over it. You can also go into the level and look into the Kismet sequence yourself to see where you did things differently, to see what I did originally, just in case you missed a step in here and you didn't want to go back. I also want to say thanks for viewing this tutorial. I'll be doing more of these for my portfolio. Please check out the rest of my portfolio. Please check out the Afflicted on IndieDB, linked in the description below. Make sure to check out the network, which is linked below at IndieDB. Also, comment, like, subscribe to me. Comment with things and suggestions you want me to do. If you want to learn something in UDK, please comment. Tell me what I'm doing right, what I'm doing wrong. I want to learn from this. I want to say thanks for viewing this again. You can check out the written version of this tutorial on my portfolio. I'll have that linked in the description below. And that's about it. So thanks for checking this out, and I hope you learned some stuff.